So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this talk. The subject today is Evita's secret prefrontal lobotomy. Lux et veritas, light and truth, is Yale University's motto. I am an Argentine-born U.S. citizen, a Mayo Clinic-trained Connecticut neurosurgeon, an honorary professor at the Yale University School of Medicine, a cultural historian, one of your guest speakers. And this talk is Argentina, Connecticut, Mayo, and Yale-centric. It is about neurosurgery, the human brain, the crown jewel of evolution, an operation performed in 1952 on Evita Peron for relief of pain and anxiety from metastatic cancer, for control of aggression and belligerence, and for personality change and behavior modification. It is about psychosurgery and about a convoluted political drama, a sinister plot. It is about a power couple, Juan and Eva Peron. And Argentina in the early 1950s, a place far away for most of us, and a long time ago, but when some of us were already alive. This is the official portrait of María Eva Duarte de Perón, better known as Evita, Argentina's First Lady in 1952. I met Evita when I was a school child in kindergarten. It was in Mendoza, my birthplace. And with a team of collaborators, we uncovered, more than a decade ago, a state secret in Argentina that was not ever meant to be revealed. In fact, this information is still sensitive there, where it continues to be officially suppressed and or ignored, and it must be considered in its time and place. It deals with politics and state secrets, history of medicine and of Argentina, ethics of neuroscience, and medical professionalism. The initial research done in 2010 by a team led by me was published in 2011 and 2012, in Spanish first in the journal NeuroTarget, and then in English in the journal World Neurosurgery. And the title of the World Neurosurgery article was, quote, "New Evidence of Prefrontal Lobotomy in the Last Months of the Illness of Eva Peron." In July 2015, Neurosurgical Focus of the Journal of Neurosurgery of the American Association of Neurological Surgeons published my article, quote, "Prefrontal Lobotomy on Evita was done for behavior personality modification, not just for pain control." And in November 2015, the Clinical Journal of Neuroscience from Melbourne, Australia, published the article Evita's Lobotomy, written by a group of authors from Harvard and Yale, including me. The story, narrated by me in 2017 and 2022, both in Spanish and in English, can be found in YouTube. Argentina, in the southern cone of the American continent, is a large and beautiful country with many scenic places. It was a very rich and developed country in the first half of the 20th century. But the economic history of Argentina has suffered from a peculiar characteristic, the so-called paradox of Argentina, a country that, having achieved advanced development, then experiences a reversal. There is now a new administration in Argentina under a new president, Mr. Milei, and there is some moderate optimism that the situation might finally improve. Unfortunately, Argentina's corruption economic problems and political instability have continued. And this is what is also called the parable of Argentina. Argentina has had a dangerous Byzantine and convoluted political history, and it is a place of deadly conspiracies. The list of famous Argentines is long. Francis, the past Pope of the Catholic Church, born Jorge Bergoglio; Maxima, Queen of Holland; several Nobel Prize winners in medicine, chemistry, peace; General San Martin, the liberator of Argentina, Chile, and Peru; prominent surgeons, writers, musicians; world champion soccer players like Maradona and Messi; revolutionaries like El Che Guevara, and others including Eva Peron, Evita. And Buenos Aires, the Queen of the Plata, remembers, adores, and sometimes abhors the memory of Evita. The 2022 Soccer World Championships multitudes resembled Evita's adoring crowds of followers in the early 1950s. Evita showed up in the Argentine currency in 2024, 2025, many decades after her death. And former First Lady, 2 times President, and recent Vice President of Argentina, presently under house arrest for corruption, Ms. Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, is a strong follower of Evita's ideals. Evita is still remembered, missed, and even worshipped in Argentina today. And Buenos Aires has an early 20th century European flavor. This is Avenida 9 de Julio, according to the Argentines, the widest in the world, and at its center there is an obelisk, and in the back, the River Plate, El Río de la Plata. And this black arrow in the left upper corner of the slide points to a government building intruding into the avenue that has a giant metal portrait of Evita delivering an angry and passionate harangue, and a second portrait on the other side of the building shows Evita smiling at us from above. By the way, Evita's portraits have been scheduled to be removed by order of the new administration to, quote, avoid politically partisan images. And the portraits were Cristina's idea. And at the Buenos Aires posh neighborhood, there is a fancy cemetery named La Recoleta, where the Duarte Mausoleum with Eva Peron's crypt is found. Paradoxically, Evita rests at the place where her enemies, whom she referred to as the oligarchs, the land owners, also lie. So the death of Eva Peron on July 26, 1952, at age 33, childless and at the peak of her power, caused great commotion in Argentina and in the rest of the world. Evita, as most of you know, is a well-known historical figure. Evita was a proto-feminist. She preceded 2 female presidents of Argentina, Isabelita in the middle and Cristina on the right. She was a precursor of revolutionaries. To the right is El Che Guevara's metal portrait at La Plaza de la Revolución in Havana, Cuba, similar to Evita's in Buenos Aires. Evita has been on Broadway and in Hollywood, and also in the West End in London at the Palladium until this past September 2025. Who was Eva Peron, Evita? She was the second wife of Juan Perón, born in 1919 and died in 1952, and Juan Domingo Perón, born in 1895 and died in 1974, was 3 times president of Argentina. He was 24 years older than Evita, but survived her 22 years. Juan Perón was a military man who served as military attaché in the Argentine embassy in Rome, Italy between 1939 and 1941, and became there an admirer of Mussolini, Il Duce, whom he met, and of Adolf Hitler. And Juan Perón founded a political movement in Argentina known as Peronism that was still in power up to just a year ago, 80 years after its foundation. He was a leader of the so-called Third World position and was involved in the failed formation of a Fourth Reich in Argentina. And look at Argentine troops in 1945 with their uniform very much German-like. I'm sure you agree with me. Perón encouraged a personality cult. He was an intellectual, a professor of military history at the Argentine Army's War College. And Perón was ousted by the army in 1955 after 12 years of what I remember was a mix of fascism, populism, cronyism, intimidation, and plain thievery, though many of the poor regarded Perón as an idol. And what about Evita? By 1941, Evita was a radio and a B-movie actress, and by 1946, the year I was born, she was first the mistress and then the second wife of the democratically elected president of Argentina, Colonel, then General Juan Domingo Perón. Eva Perón was a Cinderella who went from rags to riches. Here she's on the left in Dior Couture. She favored Van Cleef and Arpels jewelry at Place Vendôme. She wore expensive designer gowns. She had a great glamour and poise, and was the head of the powerfully rich Fundación Eva Perón and of the female branch of the Peronist Party. She was charismatic, a self-described fanatic revolutionary, and she became an idol of the left. She was an actress who dressed to kill. And Juan and Evita were a couple. Now, were they a loving couple, as we were taught? Here she is in Mendoza in December 1950 at her peak, when I had a chance to meet her, and she had the beauty of youth. And then Evita got sick, and the story of her illness and death is one of pain and sorrow, full of lies, deceit, secrets, and misinformation. Evita first fell ill in January 1951. She had an appendectomy by Dr. Oskar Ivanisevich, a surgeon and a government minister, but the removed appendix was normal. She was anemic, had vaginal hemorrhages, she had a palpable uterine mass. She initially declined a hysterectomy. We must remember she was only 32 and had no children. In the photo, you can see Evita with Dr. Ivanisevich. And on August 22, 1951, at a rally for the re-election of Juan Perón, held at the Avenida 9 de Julio in Buenos Aires, a crowd of almost 2 million Peronist supporters asked Evita to accept the candidacy to the vice presidency of Argentina for the Peronist Party. The crowd clamored for a Perón ticket. That was also her own plan and desire, and we now know that she was blocked by her own husband, who forced her to renounce after she had already accepted the nomination. Soon after, and this is very important for the story, in September 1951, Evita, already ill, purchased weapons and started organizing workers' militias, without Juan Perón's nor the armed forces' knowledge, supposedly to, quote, defend him from his enemies. Later on, when old, Juan Perón admitted to have been afraid of only one person throughout his life, Evita. In September 1951, Evita underwent a cervical uterine biopsy by a known gynecologist. The pathology showed cervical cancer, invasive. In October 1951, she underwent an intravaginal radium therapy planned before a hysterectomy for cancer of the cervix that was done in the presidential mansion El Palacio Unzué, and it was located where the National Library of Argentina is today. And in November 1951, Evita was admitted to the Polyclinic Presidente Peron of the Foundation Eva Peron in Avellaneda, Buenos Aires, and this photo was taken the night before surgery. It was a radical hysterectomy. On the right of the photograph is Dr. Finocchieto, a well-known general surgeon, and on the left, President Peron and Evita's gynecologist, and in bed, Evita. In this picture, you can see Evita, Dr. Finocchieto, and President Peron. And surgery was performed on November the 6th, 1951. Argentines were told that Dr. Ricardo Finocchieto was the chief surgeon. It was only in the 1990s that it was revealed that an American, Dr. George Pack, had been the operating surgeon. He had been secretly brought in from New York City Sloan Kettering Memorial Hospital, and that was what we call the first big secret. Evita never met Dr. Pack while awake and was never told directly of him, nor of the diagnosis of cancer. In 1952, Evita suffered from anemia, pain, agitation and anxiety, and increasing anger and belligerence. She underwent external beam radiotherapy and blood transfusions, and she was the first patient in Latin America to receive intravenous chemotherapy. Back then it was nitrogen mustard, a treatment developed by Goodman and Gilman in New Haven, Connecticut at Yale University. On May 1, 1952, Labor Day in Argentina and in most of the world, not in the US, she gave her last public speech. With lots of anger and incitement to violence, she attacked her enemies, quote, ferociously, particularly the armed forces, using violent threats in, quote, turbid language. Later, at the inaugural of the second presidential term of Juan Perón on June 4, 1952, she stood in an open automobile, a Packard, obviously sick, wearing a fur coat, concealing a metal harness to keep her upright. It was a very cold day, June, almost winter, in Buenos Aires. At the end of June 1952, she was only 36 kilograms, 80 pounds, and in the last 2 months of her life, it was reported that Evita was, quote, very quiet and only intermittently lucid. Evita died on July 26, 1952 at 8:25 p.m. And from that moment on, and until September 16, 1955, when the military coup known as La Revolución Libertadora took place, there was a daily repetition on radio and TV at precisely 8:25 p.m., pausing all programs to say, quote, it's 2025, time when Evita, spiritual leader of the nation, passed into immortality. Evita's funeral in Buenos Aires on August the 9th, 1952, was huge, impressive. In fact, we can quote the lyrics of Evita and say, oh, what an exit. That's how to go when they are ringing your curtain down, demand to be buried, like Eva Peron. Evita's body was embalmed by a Spanish anatomist, a professor in Córdoba, Argentina. The body was preserved to look as if in a sleep-like state. The procedure worked, and the body showed no sign of decomposition when it was interred at her final resting place many years later. Here is a photo of her embalmed body. Look at the blue arrow. There is a horizontal surgical scar along the hairline on the right. So there is a wide myth about Evita. She's often called the repentant sinner devoted to charity, the mother of the poor, the lady of hope, the sister of the afflicted. There are busts of Evita Peron that can be found all over Argentina. This one is in Ushuaia, Tierra del Fuego, and my wife Goldie stands next to it in 2015. And a few months ago, in April of this year, in 2025, at the same place. She's called Santa, a saint. I want to share with you that there was a discussion of making her officially a saint when the Argentine Pope was alive and in power. There is also a black myth about Evita. She has been called satanic, a serpent. a power-hungry prostitute, bloodthirsty, conspiratorial, divisive. Here I am at age 4, and on the right my reading primer from 1952 titled Evita. And in the first page you can read in Spanish, Esa es mamá, that is mom. Esa es Evita, that is Evita. Viva mamá, viva Evita. If we don't call that brainwash, I don't know what to call it. While in second grade for a school-wide competition, I wrote the winning essay about Evita. It was in 1953, and I was rewarded with Evita's saving stamps that you can see now. So Evita's postmortem travails are well known, and I will not mention all of them in this talk, and this has been an introduction to the story. In 2010, Dr. Luis Savastano, a young physician from Argentina, worked on a project with me. He completed a neurosurgical residency in the US in 2019 at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor and at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and is now in the staff at UCSF, University of California, San Francisco. By the way, he's the tall man next to me in the picture. We wrote together a biography of Dr. George Udvarhely, a Hungarian, Argentine, American, famous Johns Hopkins neurosurgeon who had just died in Baltimore, Maryland. And we found that in a 2005 interview with the Baltimore Sun, Dr. Udvarhely had said Eva Peron underwent a prefrontal lobotomy in 1952, and he added, I participated in the surgery. This information was not present in any of the many written biographies of Evita, and trust me, I had read all of them. By the way, Dr. George Bela Udvarhely was born in 1920 in Budapest, Hungary, where he graduated at the top of his class from medical school, and lived in Argentina between 1948 and 1954, where he trained as a neurosurgeon, then moved to the US to Johns Hopkins. And he stated regarding Evita, and I quote, a prefrontal lobotomy was performed for the pain, and afterwards she became an emaciated lady, quite pathetic. This was later confirmed by reading his memoirs provided to us by his son, also a physician. And we started a research project to investigate Dr. Udvarhely's shocking claim that Eva Peron Evita had undergone a lobotomy at the time of her terminal illness in 1952. And perhaps I have to tell you why shocking and what is a prefrontal lobotomy. The operation, although bizarre, was the state of the art in 1952 as a treatment of last recourse for pain, especially from cancer, and also for anxiety and agitation. So why such a long-lasting, strictly enforced, well-kept state secret? And I feel, again, it requires some explanation. The frontal lobe is the largest and the most recently evolved of the cerebrum 4 lobes, and it is involved in the most specific capacities to the human mind, the so-called higher mental functions. The birth of prefrontal lobotomy was in 1935 at the Frontal Lobe Symposium in London, England, where Fulton and Jacobsen from Yale reported that frontal and prefrontal cortical damage in chimpanzees led to a massive reduction in aggression, while complete removal of the frontal cortex led to the inability to induce experimental neurosis on the chimpanzees. And on hearing this presentation, Dr. Igas Moniz, a professor of neurology at the University of Lisbon, Portugal, wondered if the surgical procedure would be beneficial for people with otherwise untreatable psychosis. And back in Lisbon, he and neurosurgeon Pedro Almeida Lima started a program of procedures on psychiatric patients, inmates at an asylum for the insane, first injecting pure alcohol into the frontal white matter and then surgically sectioning it, calling the operation prefrontal leucotomy, from leuko or leuko, white in Greek, and later calling the operation just plain prefrontal lobotomy. Articles refer to it as the white cut, the cutting of the mind, or damaging the brain to save the mind. In 1949, Igas Moniz was the Nobel Prize in Medicine for the development of prefrontal lobotomy, and very importantly also for the development of cerebral angiography in 1927. And in the US, at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., Dr. Walter Freeman, a neurologist, and Dr. James Watts, a neurosurgeon, almost simultaneously to Moniz, developed what they call standard lobotomy and then transorbital lobotomy, the latter also known as ice pick lobotomy. Many patients had the surgery, including Rosemary Kennedy, the younger sister of JFK, and in 2015 I wrote an article on the contributions of Connecticut and Yale University in the development of the procedure. This is, by the way, Yale, the School of Medicine, and from Yale University, New Haven, Connecticut, were both Harvey Cushing, the acknowledged father of neurosurgery, and John Fulton, the father of psychosurgery. Another very innovative surgeon researcher at Yale was Dr. Jose Delgado, originally from Madrid, and Dr. William Beecham Scoville from Hartford, Connecticut. So prefrontal lobotomy in 1952 had distinct indications. Number one was psychiatric illness. Number two was intractable pain from terminal cancer. And number three, mind control. And mind control, of course, was the most controversial indication. Particularly was done for behavior personality modification, for management of violence and bellicosity. In the book Violence and the Brain, Mark and Irving from Boston, Massachusetts, quoted an aphorism of Hippocrates. Quote, "Extreme remedies are very appropriate for extreme diseases." And during the civil unrest of the 1960s in the US, Dr. Sweet, Mark, and Irving recommended, quote, "pacify the leaders of the urban riots through lobotomies." A famous lobotomist was Dr. James Leonard Poppen from Boston, Massachusetts, the head of neurosurgery at the Leahy Clinic. He described the so-called superior approach for the prefrontal lobotomy cases, superior as coming from above. Here you can see a diagram of Poppen's superior approach and a post-mortem anatomical specimen of a human brain showing a bilateral prefrontal lobotomy drawn through a superior approach a la Poppen. And here is a CAT scan of the head, already in the 70s, of a prefrontal lobotomy patient. Please see the white arrows. Psychosurgery rose and then declined after the advent of psychopharmacology with chlorpromazine or thorazine in 1953. And mostly the problem was that side effects were close to the desired effects, and many patients got better but became zombies. Movies were made about the most questionable and controversial indications for psychosurgery, particularly when the procedure was done for personality behavior modification, especially for political reasons, on nonconformists, dissenters, rebels, and renegades. In California state prisons, Atascadero and Vacaville, inmates had lobotomies done for violence control and personality modification, as I will tell you, Dr. Poppen did also in Argentina. Then came what we call the Belmont Report, known like that after a town named Belmont in Massachusetts, that was released in 1974 that severely reduced and limited psychosurgery just to extreme cases. So let me take you back to Evita's lobotomy. We found evidence that gave validity to Dr. Ulrah's claim that Eva Peron underwent a prefrontal lobotomy in Buenos Aires, Argentina in 1952, and that although allegedly it was done for treatment of pain, anxiety, and agitation secondary to uterine metastatic cancer, we also suspected and then confirmed that the secret operation was primarily done for behavior and personality modification for political reasons and objectives. And Dr. James L. Poppen from Boston, Massachusetts, had been the neurosurgeon. This is from a partial photo of the Mayo Clinic Neurosurgical Department in 1972. Dr. Ed Laws, one of my mentors, is in the front on the far right. I am in the back on the left top under the white arrow. Laws was Udvar Hai's favorite student at Hopkins. And I met Dr. Udvar Hai through Dr. Laws at Mayo in 1972. Dr. Udvar Hai was then a visiting professor at that time. I wish I had known then what I later learned about Evita. Although I am afraid he might not have told me anything. I was just a young resident in training back then. Dr. Laws came to New Haven as a visiting professor at Yale. And we did research and studied the situation, and looking for hard evidence, we learned that by order of the new military junta in October 1955, X-rays were obtained of the embalmed body of Evita. The military wanted to know that she was not just a doll. And X-rays were done by a Buenos Aires radiologist named Dr. Guido Gota. The X-rays were in Buenos Aires in the hands of his son, also a radiologist, and one of his associates, Drs. Gota and Busi. Dr. Gota Jr. passed away a couple of years ago, and I keep some kind of a friendship with Dr. Busi. We asked them for the X-rays. They sent us X-rays of the chest, the abdomen, the limbs that show metastatic disease. But what about the skull X-rays? We wanted to see them. They told us they were lost, and we were afraid we had reached a dead end. But then we saw a documentary made in 1997 lasting 6 hours in which X-rays of Evita's skull appear hanging in a view box for just a few seconds. These frames were extracted from the film, and here they are. The arrows, of course, added by us, point to 2 circular radiolucencies with central opacities consistent with images of trephinations and bone rondelles, as we call it in neurosurgery. The images are compatible with a superior surgical approach for a prefrontal lobotomy a la Poppen. The images are compatible with a bilateral frontal lobotomy. So who was the neurosurgeon? We suspected and later learned that it was Dr. James Leonard Poppen himself. In fact, he was a lobotomist par excellence, a great South American traveler, a neurosurgeon to the stars, the author of a known atlas of neurosurgical techniques. He wrote a book, Peron the Man, and was a friend and supporter of General Peron. He was a mentor to Dr. David Fireman, a Buenos Aires neurosurgeon whom I met, and who was Dr. Poppen's translator in Argentina. We confirmed that he had been Evita's neurosurgeon by reading a Leahy Clinic newspaper. We interviewed neurosurgeon Dr. Gerwin Neumann from Boston, Massachusetts, his last associates, please see the upper left corner picture, who said, quote, Jim Poppen, the bear, that's the way he called him, operated on Evita. Dr. Neumann introduced us to Dr. Poppen's favorite scrub nurse and confidant, Manena Riquelme, RN, who lived in retirement both in Chile and in Florida, and who said, quote, Dr. Poppen did a prefrontal lobotomy on Eva Peron in 1952 in an interview in front of cameras and with a journalist, and the interview took place in Chile in 2012, and we have a copy of the video. And also, she added, he also did it on a few prisoners in Buenos Aires. That was shocking. Here are Dr. Poppen and Manena in 1965. Manena with me in Vitacura, Santiago de Chile in 2012. Unfortunately, she died in July 2024. And here you can see journalist Nelson Castro from Buenos Aires, who flew to Santiago de Chile and also came to Connecticut in the US to confirm the story, produced a documentary that is available in YouTube, and wrote a book. Here I am at the Leahy Clinic in Boston, Massachusetts in August 2019, pointing at Dr. Poppen's portrait at the entrance hall of the clinic. And we found several photos in Buenos Aires saved and kept by colleagues. In this one, we can see 4 people sitting around the table at La Casa Rosada, the pink house, the government house in 1952. We can see from left to right Popen, Fireman, Finocchieto, and Peron. And the saga has continued. Recently, I enlarged my photo collection through eBay, and I got a few other pictures. This photo is handwritten and signed by Juan Perón himself, and although it appears as dated in 1954, the photo is actually from May 1952, before the lobotomy, as you will see in the next photograph taken from a different angle. And this is the other photo. Please see the blue arrow that points to May the 4th, 1952, a date written by Dr. Popen in his own handwriting. There are presents or gifts for Perón from Popen on the table, and from Perón for Popen also on the table. Juan Perón is on the left and James Popen on the right. And here again you see Drs. Popen and Finocchieto. Please notice Dr. Finocchieto's black bow tie and mourning left sleeve band worn for Evita after her death in July 1952. And here is President Juan Perón with the same attire. Mrs. Popen once showed Manena that she was wearing one of Evita's jewels, given to her husband as a present by General Perón himself. It was a ring with a large ruby. So we learn who assisted Dr. Popen was Dr. David Fireman, a former fellow of his and a translator of Popen while in Buenos Aires, and Dr. George Udvarhai, who was the neurosurgical resident in Buenos Aires then. We learn where the operation took place, at the presidential palace, El Palacio Unzué. A bedroom had been turned into an operating room. And there were armed guards in the OR, as per a 2011 letter sent to me after the paper was published by a neurosurgeon from Orange County, California, Dr. Yancy Beamer, who learned about this directly from Dr. Popen while at a dinner at a neurosurgical meeting in Virginia. Now, the question is, was it to guard him or to watch him? By the way, the presidential palace was blown up by orders of the junta in 1955 to prevent it from becoming a shrine to the memory of Evita. When did the surgery take place? We learned that it was in June 1952. What were the indications? Certainly intractable pain. She was suffering from pain from metastatic cervical cancer, certainly for agitation and anxiety, but we suspected and confirmed that it was for personality modification and management of Evita's violent behavior disorder, with and for political reasons and objectives. It was done to avoid a bloody civil war. It was a time of terror and threats. Unfortunately, after the surgery, Evita stopped eating and died a few weeks later, and you saw the funeral she got. So, Loris Zanata, a professor of Latin American history at the University of Bologna, wrote in a, quote, a political biography of Evita that Evita prided herself of being a fanatic in 1952. And her last public speech, as I told you, on May the 1st, 1952, was emotional and angry and was calling for violence. And Zanata also wrote that Evita's political birth started earlier than is commonly accepted and was parallel to that of Perón's. There was an inevitable and growing competition between them, and Argentina's Peronism was bicephalic in 1952. There was no loving relationship between Juan and Eva. And Evita dictated a 79-page document testament entitled My Message that showed up relatively recently, and if you read it, you can find evidence of her belligerence and violent state of mind. And she started to arm and train militias. Evita purchased 5,000 automatic pistols, 1,500 machine guns, and a large amount of ammunition from Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, the so-called Black Prince, a known arms dealer, and started training worker militias in 1952 at Cerrito Island in El Chaco province in northeast Argentina. and this was done without the knowledge of her husband, General Juan Peron, nor of the military. So there has been a myth that Evita and Juan were a loving couple. They were what we call today a power couple, a political couple. It turns out Juan was unhappy and unloving, and today Juan Peron is not particularly loved or liked by the supporters of Evita. He died, by the way, in 1974. Evita's prefrontal lobotomy was performed for raison d'etat. Her husband, General Peron, ordered the operation. Dr. Poppen was just a willing instrument. Juan Peron's likely political objectives were to avoid a bloody civil war in Argentina, as it unhappily took place in the 1970s, with thousands of people dead and disappeared. The surgery was done for mind control, and the operation was done even without Evita's knowledge. Dr. Poppen became a tool of the state, and I am aware that we have to be careful on how to speak of the dead. And even a more delicate issue, Nurse Riquelme disclosed that Dr. Poppen, asked by Juan Peron, also performed a prefrontal lobotomy on a half a dozen political prisoners in Buenos Aires prisons. In the 20th century, both in communist Soviet Union and Red China, and in fascist Nazi Germany, medicine regressed. After these authoritarian systems corrupted the ethics of the medical profession and forced it to descend into unprecedented dark barbarism. The Soviet psychiatrists and the Nazi doctors were physicians, willingly cooperating with the totalitarian state, allegedly in the name of the collective good, at the expense of their individual patients. A media frenzy ensued after the publications, first in the UK, and then, of course, in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, in Mendoza, in all the other 23 provinces in Argentina. The New York Times, at home in Connecticut, the BBC, and in many languages, in Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Italian, French, German, in many newspapers and magazines around the world, in Turkish, in Hungarian, and of course in Portuguese, in Brazil, and in most of the Latin American countries, including Mexico. In Dutch in 2020, even in Greek, in the Wikipedia, in many magazines and newspapers, as I told you, in Italian books. In tour guides of the New Haven campus of Yale University, they describe my work on Evita. In Spanish newspapers and TV programs around the world, and there have been threats against me. Followers of Evita don't like the story, and certainly followers of Juan Peron don't like it. In Dr. Schwartz's newest book, Great Matters, A Biography of Brain Surgery, that just came out a couple of months ago, there is an entire chapter dedicated to my work. And I have given many lectures on the subject at Yale University, at universities and medical centers, and aboard many cruise ships around the world. I was interviewed on radio and TV, in Paris, France, in the US, because the subject belongs to the field of neuroethics that is part of bioethics. It raises several questions to physicians. Number one, informed consent, and number two, the problem of conflict of interest, particularly with patients with aggressive behavior. I contributed with a chapter on psychosurgery in the now classical psychiatry textbook by Kim, Treatment Resistance in Psychiatry. Finally, let's remember Juan and Evita. Evita at her peak in 1950, and dramatic changes between 1950 and 1952, especially after the lobotomy. And just as the prefrontal cortex is widely interlocked with other cerebral regions, a great social and professional network, even before Facebook and other social media, was required and utilized. A social network in both American hemispheres, North and South, allowed us to find the truth of this story of Juan and Evita Peron during my childhood in Argentina. I hope I was able to share the essence of this tragic story and its many implications and lessons. And I certainly will be glad to hear questions and comments at any time and place during and after the cruise. I thank you very much, and I want to tell you that my next talk, the last one in this cruise, is on the Michelangelo Code in the Sistine Chapel in Rome and what we call the quest for the eternal truth. Goldie, and my email address is nijensohn@aol.com, and I want to thank you again. Thank you very much.